Good morning, Skallywags, and welcome to another episode in a series of enigmatic events. I'm Shpoo.
I'm AJ. So I want you to picture this.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
You. Okay, you are the biggest tourist attraction in your town.
Well, you know.
I mean, we live in Branson, so that does tend to give you a lot of competition.
Gotta be bigger than a country gospel music star from the 50s. Okay, cool. Got it.
But let's take you to a smaller town.
Okay.
And now you're the biggest celebrity in town.
Okay.
People from all over the state and even other states come to your little town just to see you.
Okay.
You liking that?
Yeah. Been there, actually. It's been a long time ago.
Now imagine you're not even alive to enjoy it.
What the hell? I was into this. What? Now I'm dead. What happened?
But you're famous.
Great.
I mean, you're not famous, but your mummified body is famous.
Lovely. Turns out that is exactly the story that we're going to be covering today. It's the story of an unidentified body of a traveling salesman known only as Old Mike. And this story takes us to Prescott, Arkansas.
Not far from here.
Not far from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty close actually.
August 20th, 1911, when the southbound train pulls up to, like you said, Prescott, Arkansas. This is the daily occurrence. At 3 p.m., that train is there. And off this train steps a 5-foot, very thin man with a limp on his left side. Sometimes he walks with a cane, sometimes he doesn't, or a crutch.
And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we actually teased this one. This is probably, out of everything we've covered thus far, this is by far the most fun.
And bizarre.
And weird and just, what were they thinking type of situation, if it's okay to call an unsolved mystery fun, but not, you'll see what we're talking about very shortly.
Bizarre.
This is a quick one. The man was absolutely no stranger to Prescott, or for that matter, a stranger to any of the small towns in the area. He was known at the very least a small amount.
Right.
He would get off the southbound train once every month or so and sell his wares there on the street. Usually things like pencils and erasers and pieces of string, that type of thing.
He would always stay in Prescott for about 24 hours, getting off at 3 p.m. on the southbound train, and then the next day, getting on that train and heading on down south to the rest of his journey. However, this time, his journey didn't go anywhere else. Or at least not in any way anyone would ever, ever imagine.
So on the evening of August 20th, 1911, the town of Prescott was holding a tent revival in the city park. Since the, traveling salesman didn't have anything else going on for the night, he decided to attend the revival. So he limped his way through the crowd, and then at some point during the revival, or perhaps shortly thereafter, the always smiling, always friendly, always familiar traveling salesman sat down in the grass under a blanket of stars, leaned back against a tree, and peacefully passed away.
It was very peaceful until you said passed away.
I mean, if you're gonna go, that's a great way to go.
Yeah. The next morning, city officials found the body of, like you said, the always smiling, always helpful traveling salesman, leaned up against the tree just as he was setting the night before. They took his body to the Prescott Hardware Company, which in this story, back in the day, doubled as the city morgue.
Small towns.
Yeah, hardware store, morgue.
Yeah, it's like it was like the funeral home, depot.
No.
Jokes, we got them.
That was bad.
Yes, it was. Intentionally. The coroner declared that the man's death was either a heart attack or perhaps possibly a stroke. But he declared with all certainty that no foul play had taken place.
Yet.
He also determined that the man was between 40 and 45 years old, and that leading up to his death was not in overall good health. A lot of people over the years have said that the stroke is most likely, as he did have that limp, so he favored his left side, so they think that maybe he had actually had a stroke before this. and that may have been what happened or what led to his limp. And so it's most likely that the stroke is what took his life as well.
The man carried no identification, which actually in 1911 wasn't uncommon.
Right.
But it did mean that it was going to be a little harder for the coroner to identify him. Many members of the community said that they knew who he was, or at least partially. They recognized him as being Old Mike, you know, the traveling salesman who would sell them papers or pencils or whatever. It's not known if his name was Mike or if they just called him Mike. I don't think the old part came in yet, but
that comes in later.
Yeah.
Basically, there was just a couple of people.
It's like, I think his name is Mike.
Yeah, everyone recognized him. Oh, yeah, that's that guy that sells paper and stuff. But there was a couple of people that were like, I don't know, I always just called him Mike.
But no one knew his last name, or if they did, they didn't remember his last name. And unfortunately, Mike had nothing on his body or on his persons at all to give any identification or a clear place of where they could look or anything.
Having said that, the one piece that makes this story truly just gut-wrenchingly sad is that they do believe that everything he had on him was everything he had. Like all of his worldly possessions. And all of those things fit in his pockets. But still, none of these items could give any indication as to who he may have been. Inside his pockets, they found 80 cents, a silver teaspoon, a handkerchief, and about a dozen pencils. And that was all.
It's so sad.
That's very
That's
sad.
your life.
Right. But he was always happy. He was always smiling, always friendly, just always this bubbly, bouncing...
On the street selling you a pencil.
Yeah.
After the news spread throughout the town and then the surrounding areas, there were some witnesses that stepped forward to give a little bit of information about this traveling salesman.
One person said that he had seen the man just a few weeks prior in a drunk tank in Little Rock.
Maybe that's why he was always happy.
Could be.
That's so bad of me.
Well, I mean, this is also, 1911, for people, you know, if he did have some kind of a crippling injury that gave him the limp.
Alcohol.
Being a drinker, a heavy drinker, was not
self-medicating.
uncommon. Yeah, that was totally typical back then. But they also said that a municipal judge in Little Rock had actually ordered the man out of town, which doesn't fit with his character at all from what everyone else has said about him.
Well, and also we couldn't find, digging up, I mean, it was back then, but digging up any information, we couldn't find any news reports or anything like that happened. So.
But also not knowing an exact timeline, not knowing the man's name, of course, research is a little difficult.
Another person claimed that when he was talking to Mike, that Mike had told him that he had a sister who lived in Chicago, but there was no place or name or anything like that. He couldn't remember any details other than, I think he said he had a sister in Chicago.
Think about anybody that you've ever just casually met that told you about their sister in another city.
You just don't remember those things.
Right. Another person said that they had seen him in Gurdon and also Arkadelphia, which are both serviced by that same train. So really, none of that proved to be helpful whatsoever.
They probably did see him. I feel like he stopped at every town to make some money.
That was pretty much his life, just riding the train and selling his paper and pencils.
But, you know, all of these witnesses don't help with anything.
Right.
They literally, there's nothing groundbreaking in their statements. It's just, yes, we saw him.
I've seen him.
Yeah.
Nothing happened, but I saw him. The only helpful thing at all was the clothes that he was wearing did trace back to a shop in Texarkana. But even there, when they questioned the shop owner about, do you remember the man that bought, this particular suit? He couldn't remember anything of significance about the person. So the most that they got was that he bought a suit in Texarkana.
Which also is part of the southbound
same railway. Right.
So that's not, I feel like it's just another stop he did and he needed a new suit.
Could have easily been.
Officials actually hoped that his appearance would help identify him eventually. Like I said earlier, he was a small man, very small. He was 5'4", which is actually a half inch shorter than me. So short.
And she's short.
He had a full head of thick, dark reddish brown hair and like really dark eyes. He had a dark mustache and looked very much of like Italian or Mediterranean descent. He had a tattoo of a woman standing on a pedestal on his right arm, and this part is interesting. He had very extensive gold dental work to where the coroner at the time was like, that's impressive dental work.
Right.
Like there's a quote I found where the dentist was, or the coroner was like, he had the most impressive dental work I've ever seen.
And they even took pictures of the dental work and sent it around to a number of dentists. They even sent them to Boston and New York, hoping that, anybody can you give us an idea of where this may have been done at?
I feel like it's got fancy dental work.
Right. They even suggested that once they looked at those pictures, we're talking Boston, New York, back during the time, these were like the biggest cities in the U.S. So they looked at them and they suggested that they were most likely done in Europe, very likely Italy. So
Mediterranean
like we said,
descent.
Mediterranean descent. So that kind of links up a little bit. Between the dental work, his Mediterranean look, there were even people that said that he spoke with a slight accent. A lot of people believed that he actually was an Italian immigrant.
Without any clues to who he was and no people stepping forward to identify him, the man's body was actually turned over to the local funeral home, the Cornish Funeral Home in Prescott, Arkansas.
Yeah. And this is where it gets interesting.
The undertaker, a John D. Cornish, would embalm him. And in regards to the funeral home, like you said, this is where it gets interesting. Before we get into Mike's interesting story, there's a little tidbit of information that I gathered that says that at the time that Mike was there was also another unidentified body, this one of a female that they called Old Kathy. And I think that's where the old came from with Mike. Eventually, Old Kathy's body was actually identified. She had relatives out of state who came and identified her. And so she got to go and be buried properly and by her family members. But that leaves us with Old Mike, now the only unidentified body in the funeral home. So
far, this story just sounds like many, many other ones that would be told of unidentified bodies of vagrants or immigrants or what have you. Well, this is where this particular story takes a hard left turn into the truly bizarre and the slightly macabre. The funeral home decided that since no one could identify the man, that they would put his embalmed body on display.
Well, to be fair, they were putting it on display, so maybe somebody...
So that someone could identify him.
Yes.
That's where it began. But a week passed
Right.
with no such information coming forward.
Poor Old Mike.
And then a couple weeks passed.
Aww.
And then that turned into a month. And then that month turned into a year. That year turned into a few years. That turned into a decade. And it didn't even stop there.
All things being told, the embalmed body of the man known as Old Mike turned from a tragic tale of, no one knowing who he was to them trying to find someone to identify his body into a tourist attraction in Prescott, Arkansas.
Yeah.
This is actually what Prescott was actually known for many years. The town would get visitors from all over to see Old Mike. So much so that they actually didn't just leave him on display inside. There are photos of Old Mike's embalmed body outside, standing next to cars. And
Welcoming people as they enter the town.
or the funeral home. Yeah.
So as the years passed, Old Mike was actually known to kind of stand at the back of a storage closet behind a curtain where anyone could come in and ask to see him and go back and see him.
I can't even imagine. I feel like my mom did this. Like,
Yeah,
I feel
right.
like when my mom...
But
like,
you truly, you could literally go on vacation with your family to Arkansas, and on your way through, stop in at Prescott, stop into the local funeral home.
the Cornish
Funeral Home in Prescott, Arkansas. Walk inside and say, "Hey, I want to see Old Mike," and they would lead you back to a closet. You would pull back the curtain, and there he is. This anonymous traveling salesman who passed away quietly against a tree in 1911, just standing there. And we're not talking about like behind a viewing glass or nothing. He's right there.
Yeah. There are stories that kids would get to go into the funeral home. I feel like the funeral home was just like, yeah, we'll let anybody in.
He's in the back.
But they would go into the funeral home to see old Mike. And the thing is they would dare their friends. I dare you to go see old Mike. I dare you to touch him. Touch him.
Yeah. Like I said, no glass. Just right there.
It became a game. Like a rite of passage. Like, have you ever like seen old Mike? Have you touched him? Walked down the hallway? Oh, I don't know. This part, it bothers my heart so much.
Yeah.
But kids weren't the only ones. Kids are going to be inquisitive, and kids are going to, they are inquisitive about death, and they want to see things. But that's not the part that bothers me the most. The most is the fact that families from states around Arkansas and also in Arkansas would make trips to go see old Mike. They would travel to Prescott. They would travel to the funeral home. They would ask to see old Mike. They would be ushered down.
Field trips
They would be ushered down a hallway. They would have a door open and a curtain drawn to see the mummification of this poor man's body. I feel like my mom did this trip. I really do. But I feel like that's not a trip that you go, hey, you know what? I mean, we might. But
I totally would.
But I feel like that's kind of disturbing.
Yeah. I mean, it was even said that there was even a couple of traveling carnivals that offered to buy old Mike. One of them even offered the funeral home $1,000 for
his body.
For this man. For this man's body. Fortunately, the funeral home said that they couldn't justify selling a human being's body, which is like the double standard of the century, because you know we can't do, we're profiting too much off of this guy. We can't sell him.
I actually did not find any piece of information that said they charged people.
No, they didn't charge from him, but I'm saying that it drew enough attention that you know that people would use that funeral home just because it's the old Mike funeral home.
Well, I mean, they were very proud of their embalming.
Yeah, he's too good for business. They can't get rid of him. So, because you mentioned too good for embalming there, like we mentioned, we left something out earlier in the script, back when they first embalmed old Mike. And we left it out intentionally so that we could bring it up here. But apparently the person who did the embalming on old Mike said that the reason they kept old Mike on display was not just so that people could identify him, but it was also so that everyone could see what a good job of embalming that he did. Aren't people just great?
And while the embalming was actually quite impressive, it kept old Mike in good enough shape, at least, throughout the years.
For the most part.
Yeah. There were some issues once in a while that would pop up. They were said to have embalmed him, like put fresh fluid in him a couple times. They said that his clothes would get more worn and stuff. So the funeral home people would go out and buy old Mike new clothes and replace his old clothes. I don't know. It's so weird and disturbing.
Once somebody's mummified, how do they change?
I don't know, but they did.
Which I guess it's all button-up stuff, so that wouldn't be too hard.
He had pants.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know, but I mean, those just slide on.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it was something where you had to move the arms around and stuff, you wouldn't be able to do that.
I'm sure
but
they
no,
cut
you
it or something.
Well, yeah, you just slip it on, button it up, and it should, yeah. Anyway, these are the thoughts that keep me awake at night.
But they actually wanted to keep him looking, you know, a little fresher for the new sightseers who would come in to see him. They didn't want him in an old tattered suit. They wanted him in something nice. All of that being said, the years did take a toll on his actual body a little bit. There were rumors of extra embalming sessions where they would put fresh fluid in him to kind of help with that. But his skin did start to darken a lot. I don't know if that was also sun because he was outside. I don't know how that works. It led a lot of people near the end of these decades to think that he actually looked wooden. Like his skin looked wooden. It was that dried out.
There was also the issue that the skin around his eyes kind of began to tighten up considerably. So the funeral home came up with an idea. I can't say it was a good one, but they did come up with an idea. They decided to place bottle caps
in his eye
over
socket.
the eye sockets and paint little pupils on them to make them. It didn't. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it made the creepiness factor spike so high. I mean, look at this. That's terrifying.
They said that it made him look more lifelike. I feel like it made him less lifelike.
No, like some creepy voodoo doll or something.
Yeah.
He also shrank from 5'4" to 4'5", which certainly didn't help with the creepy doll look.
That's my fear in life, is shrinking. Like, I'm going to be so short by the time I get old.
And by the 1970s...
1911.
He only weighed about 50 pounds.
Remember, Mike passed away.
In 1911.
So, yeah, you heard that right. 1970s. In fact, there's a story from the 1970s about, you mentioned field trips.
Yeah.
There's a story in the Arkansas Democrat from 1970 that claims that there were two buses full of children who were on a field trip.
We're going to the Cornish Funeral Home today to visit a zombie.
As a parent, can you just imagine
God.
that permission slip? Dear parents, next week we're going to take our 4th grade class to the local funeral home, where they will have the pleasure of viewing the mummified corpse of a man known as Old Mike, who is an unknown man standing at the back of their closet.
We would appreciate it if you would sign this permission slip so that your child may too get to enjoy gawking at the now shrunken wooden-like stuff of nightmares while their friends dare them to touch it. Thank you so much in advance. By the 1970s, the spectacle was so well known that Johnny Carson even made a mention of Old Mike on an episode of The Tonight Show.
That's huge. That's national.
Locals said that visitors were constantly arriving into town not to see the sights, not to see the local museum. They just wanted to see the dead guy. He had truly become nationally and perhaps even internationally known.
Well, we don't know where they all came from.
Yeah.
Tourists from everywhere came to see Old Mike. However, in 1975, one of the funeral home workers actually decided that having Old Mike on display had gone far enough. He contacted Arkansas's Attorney General, a man by the name of Jim Guy Tucker at the time, to tell the story of Old Mike and request that something be done. The Arkansas legislature had just passed a thing that said that bodies needed to be buried or disposed of in a timely manner. And let's face it, with Old Mike, a timely manner was not something that happened.
Tucker's office basically put out a statement to the Cornish Funeral Home saying that Old Mike be buried immediately. And fortunately, the funeral home, they didn't make too big of a stink over it. In fact, they obliged. And quietly, they didn't contact any media. In fact, the only people who attended Old Mike's funeral was a preacher, and I believe it was 5 of the funeral home's employees.
Yeah.
So everything was done very respectfully, very quietly. Old Mike was finally laid to rest in the Deanne Cemetery in Prescott after 64 years of being on display for the entertainment of others. His gravestone is adorned with a simple statement that says, Old Mike died August 21st, 1911.
So once again, we come to our questions. The infamous questions. This time it's, who was Old Mike? Where did he come from? Why didn't anyone claim him after 64 years? And like most of the cases that we're going to give you guys, we're probably never going to know at this point. It's 64 years later. I don't think we're going to know.
So what do you guys think of the story of Old Mike? Let us know in the comments below.
And as always, be sure to follow us on all of our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And as long as you're here on YouTube, be sure to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It's really important. It keeps you up to date with everything we have going on. We have a new show Monday through Friday. Little something for everyone.
Most importantly, guys, drop us a comment. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your theories. And most importantly, let us know what you want to see next in this series of enigmatic events. Thanks for watching.